Hey everyone and welcome back. Big shout out to Sheba Coffee and Tico.
They're matcha lattes.
Yeah, those matcha lattes. They've been like my go-to this week, seriously. And of course, gotta thank Eros Nutrition,
Always keeping us healthy.
keeping us healthy and strong. Okay, so today we're diving into something that's, well, it's kind of trendy, but also kind of controversial. Raw milk.
Lots of buzz around it.
Yeah, lots of buzz. You guys have been asking about it, and I get it. You want to know, like, what's the deal? What are the potential benefits? But also, are there safety concerns? So we're going to do a deep dive. We've got some articles, some research you shared, excerpts from that Real Milk website, a Wikipedia article.
Even a YouTube video from Raw Farm.
Yes, even a YouTube video from Raw Farm. Okay, so let's jump in.
One thing that's interesting about raw milk is that it's not like a brand new thing, you know? It's not just some recent fad. This goes way back, centuries.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
For most of human history, raw milk was, well, it was the only kind of milk.
Right. And a lot of cultures, they even developed these special, like, raw milk products.
Yeah, almost like medicinal.
Yeah. And considered to have, health benefits.
Yeah, the Real Milk website, they really emphasize that historical angle. They talk about how different cultures, they use raw milk. It's like you said, almost like a medicine. And they actually point to some research, like there was this study with over 3,700 kids in England. It's crazy. Just a few glasses of raw milk each week.
Was linked to a 50% reduction in allergies.
Yes, a 50% reduction in allergies.
That's pretty significant. And it's not just one study. There's more and more research coming out, both new and old, actually, suggesting that raw milk could have benefits, like for asthma, even eczema.
Endocrine problems, yeah.
Some researchers, they even point to, like, historical accounts in medical journal.
Like the Lancet.
Exactly, the Lancet. They described this thing called immune milk therapy.
Like way back when.
Back in the 1800s. So, there's definitely something there.
It is fascinating. But then you have these organizations like the CDC, the FDA, coming out pretty strongly against raw milk. So how do we reconcile those two things?
Well, it's all about understanding both the potential benefits and the risks, right? And looking at the bigger picture, I think, is really important here. Pasteurization, it wasn't just introduced for no reason. Before that, milk-borne illnesses, those were a serious problem.
Yeah, and like those scary diseases Wikipedia talks about, like E. coli, bovine tuberculosis.
Brucellosis.
Yeah, brucellosis. Not things you want to mess with.
No, not at all. And even though, sanitation is way better now and those illnesses are much less common, that risk with raw milk,
It's still there.
it's still there. And it's important to remember some groups are more vulnerable, right? Like kids, pregnant women, the elderly, or anyone with a weakened immune system.
They're more susceptible.
Much more susceptible, yeah.
Speaking of risks, Wikipedia also mentions that bird flu outbreak from this year. That H5N1 virus, it spread to dairy cows. And they're saying that pasteurization, it probably kills it. But there were concerns about raw milk and whether it could transmit the virus to humans.
That was a big question mark.
Right. And they even mentioned like a high mortality rate in cats who drank raw milk from infected cows.
That is alarming.
Yeah, it's scary stuff.
It definitely makes you think, new threats can pop up, and we need to be aware of all sides of this, right?
Definitely. So we've got this like long history of using raw milk and some studies showing it might help with allergies, asthma, eczema. But we also have these safety concerns, especially for certain people. It's a lot to weigh.
It really is. And it's important to be, like, critical about it all. For example, some raw milk fans, they say it's this nutritional powerhouse.
Right.
But research is showing that the actual difference in nutrients, like the measured nutrients between raw and pasteurized milk,
It's not that big of a difference.
it's actually pretty small. Pasteurization, it's meant to kill bacteria, not take away all the good stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've touched on the history, the potential benefits, the safety concerns. But what about like the actual experience? What's it like to drink raw milk? That's where that Raw Farm YouTube video comes in, right?
Yeah, and their perspective is interesting. They're all about taste and texture.
It's all about the senses.
Right. And taste, of course, is subjective. But they talk about how rich and creamy their raw milk is.
They're very passionate about it.
Oh, yeah. And they say it's because their cows are grass-fed and the milk isn't processed. They also talk about the higher fat content.
Makes it more satisfying.
Supposedly, yeah. They're all about that real food angle. You
Mm.
know, raw milk is straight from the source, no processing, no additives.
And that ties back to what the Real Milk website was saying, right? Like maybe modern processing is changing milk in ways that make it harder to digest, or maybe even contributing to allergies. It's something to think about.
It is. It's not just about the bad bacteria, but how processing might be changing the milk itself.
Right. Now, about digestion, the Real Milk website also says raw milk is easier to digest, even for people who are lactose intolerant. They mentioned this survey in Michigan, where, get this, 85% of people who said they were lactose intolerant
Could drink raw milk with no problems.
with no problems. It's pretty wild.
It's definitely an interesting claim, but, it's just one survey.
We need more research.
Exactly. More research is needed to see if that applies to everyone.
But even beyond that, there's the idea that since raw milk is unprocessed, it have all these natural enzymes.
Could be gentler on the digestive system overall.
Yeah. And that makes sense, with all the focus on less processed foods these days. But again, got to weigh those potential benefits with the safety concerns.
Always. Balance is key.
So it seems like making a decision about raw milk, it really comes down to understanding both sides. The potential upsides, and the potential downsides.
You got it. And in the end, it's a personal decision. It's about your own health, your priorities, how much risk you're comfortable with.
Well said. Okay, so we've covered the history, the benefits, the risks, even the taste and digestion. But there's still so much more to unpack.
Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's take a closer look at those potential downsides. Like, specifically, the risks that come with drinking raw milk. We've talked about some of the dangers, but it's important to really get why these health organizations...
You mean like the CDC, the FDA?
Right, exactly. Why they're so cautious.
Yeah, because they come out pretty strongly against it.
Yeah.
Right? And it could feel, I don't know, a little overwhelming, especially when you're hearing all this positive stuff about raw milk, too.
I get it. It's about finding that balance, you know?
Right.
So the risks with raw milk, we're basically talking about the risk of contamination, harmful bacteria.
Contamination. Yeah.
And there are a few, key players that pop up a lot.
Like E. coli, salmonella.
Yeah, those are the big ones. Campylobacter, Listeria. Those names, they can sound pretty scary, right?
They do. But are they really that common in raw milk?
Well, studies have shown that these pathogenic bacteria, they can be present in a small percentage of raw milk samples. The exact numbers, they kind of vary, but some research is saying it could be, I don't know, less than 1%, maybe even up to 10%.
So not a huge percentage, but still.
Still a concern, right. And the thing is, even a small percentage can be a big deal when you're talking about, serious illness.
Right, because if you get sick.
Exactly. And remember those groups we talked about who are more vulnerable: kids, pregnant women, older folks. Anyone with a weakened immune system, they're at a much higher risk of getting complications from these bacteria.
Okay, so what kind of illnesses are we talking about? I know some of those bacteria, they're like food poisoning bacteria.
Yeah.
But can it be worse than that?
It can be, yeah, unfortunately. Some of these bacteria can cause really serious problems, like E. coli, for example. It can lead to severe diarrhea, really bad abdominal cramps, and sometimes even kidney failure, especially in young children. Salmonella, that can cause typhoid fever, which is, high fever, weakness, stomach pains, and sometimes even worse complications.
Typhoid fever, that sounds intense.
It is serious. Thankfully, it's not that common these days. But even the more typical salmonella infections, they can still be pretty bad, unpleasant, and potentially dangerous too.
Right.
Then you've got Campylobacter, which is probably one of the most common causes of food poisoning, worldwide. And usually it causes diarrhea, cramping, fever, but in some cases it can even lead to neurological issues like Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Guillain-Barré syndrome.
And then there's Listeria,
Yeah.
which, I think we all know that one's especially dangerous for pregnant women.
Definitely.
Listeriosis, the illness it causes, it can lead to, miscarriage, stillbirth, premature delivery, or the baby getting really sick. And for people with compromised immune systems, it can be life-threatening. Even healthy adults can have bad symptoms like high fever, stiff neck, confusion, even seizures.
It's a lot. It really puts those warnings from the health organizations into perspective.
Right. It's about understanding what you're potentially dealing with. And even though those risks, they might be low percentage-wise, the consequences, if you do get sick, they can be really serious.
Okay, so the risks are real. But what about that farm effect you mentioned earlier? How does that play into all of this?
The farm effect. So the idea there is that some of the, those health benefits that people see with raw milk, maybe they're not actually from the milk itself.
Interesting.
Maybe they're from other parts of a farming lifestyle. Think about it. A kid who grows up on a farm, they're exposed to more microbes, they're outside more, maybe they're eating more fresh food.
Yeah.
All that could mean a stronger immune system, better health overall.
So it's like saying people who live near the ocean, they're healthier because of the sea air, when it might actually be because they're, I don't know, more active or their diet is different.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to separate all those factors, right? To know what's really causing what.
That makes sense. So even with the potential benefits, there are good reasons why some people choose to avoid raw milk. But what about people who are still interested in trying it? Even with the risks, what do they need to know?
Great question. And that brings us to another important part of this whole discussion, the legal side of things, the laws around raw milk. Because, believe it or not, it's not the same everywhere.
You mean you can't just go to the store and buy it?
Not always, no. Some countries, Canada, Australia, they've totally banned selling raw milk for people to drink. Other countries, like the U.S., it's kind of all over the place, different rules in different states.
A patchwork of laws. Got it.
Exactly. And it's important to know what the laws are where you live before you even think about trying raw milk. Some states, they let stores sell it. Some only allow it straight from the farm. Others have even stricter rules.
So knowing the laws is step one. But for people who live in a place where raw milk is legal and they're still thinking about it, what would you recommend they do?
Well, if you've weighed the pros and cons and you've decided you want to explore raw milk, the most important thing is sourcing. Finding a good farm or a good supplier. That's key.
Okay, so how do you know if it's a good source? What should people be looking for?
Transparency is huge. Find a farm that's open about how they do things. Ideally, one that lets you visit, so you can actually see how the animals are treated, how they handle the milk. Don't be afraid to ask questions, do some research, and trust your gut. Literally. If something feels wrong, it probably is.
It's like choosing a restaurant, right? You check the reviews, you see how clean the place is, get a sense of the vibe.
Exactly. But remember, this is more important than a restaurant. We're talking about your health here. Look for farms that are testing their milk, checking for those bad bacteria, and being upfront about the results.
Okay, so transparency, cleanliness, and testing are important. And I guess those regulations we talked about, they matter too, right? If a farm is allowed to sell raw milk legally, they must be meeting some basic standards.
Yeah, those regulations, they set a baseline. But don't just stop there. Do your own homework. Because even with the best source, there's still the issue of, handling it right once you get it home, storing it properly.
Because raw milk is, like, more perishable,
Yeah.
right, than the pasteurized stuff.
Exactly. Keeping it cold at the right temperature, that's really important. And remember, it doesn't last as long. Try to drink it within, 3 to 5 days.
So find a good source, handle it carefully, and drink it quickly. Anything else people should keep in mind if they're going the raw milk route?
I think it's worth repeating that even if you do everything right, there's always some risk with raw milk, and it's good to know the signs of foodborne illness. So you can get help fast if you need to.
Awareness is key.
Absolutely.
So to sum it up, if you're thinking about raw milk, weigh those benefits and risks, choose your source carefully, handle it right, and be smart about food safety.
That's it in a nutshell. And, there's no shame in sticking with pasteurized milk if you're just not comfortable with those risks. It's safe, it's nutritious, and it's what most health experts recommend.
Right. It's all about making the choice that's best for you. But even with all this talk about risks and safety, I'm still kind of fascinated by those potential benefits we talked about, especially with allergies and asthma. It makes you wonder, right? Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, if raw milk could actually help with things like allergies and asthma, that would be
huge.
Huge.
Yeah, it would be revolutionary. But, we also have to be careful we can't just get carried away based on just a few studies. Remember those studies we were looking at? They're promising, but they're just a start.
We need more data, more research.
Exactly. We need more research to really confirm it, to really know how it all works.
That's true. But even if those health claims aren't totally proven yet, I don't know, there's something about the idea of drinking something less processed, more natural.
I think going back to basics.
Yeah, exactly. Like connecting with how things used to be.
I get that. It's a big trend now, people wanting whole foods, foods that haven't been messed with. And raw milk, It definitely fits into that.
It does.
But even within that, like that Whole Foods movement, there's a lot of different ideas, different ways of doing things.
What do you mean?
Well, some people, it's about, just minimizing processing. Like they might drink pasteurized milk, but they want it to be organic or grass-fed. But for some, it's about going all the way back, traditional foods, and that's where raw milk comes in.
So it's about finding what works for you, right? And knowing what you're choosing.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right? And we've given everyone listening a lot to think about today. We looked at the history of raw milk, the potential benefits, the risks, and even like all those legal issues. It's complicated.
It is. So for someone who's listening to all of this, and maybe they're a little intrigued by raw milk, but also a little unsure, what's the next step?
Well, if this deep dive made you curious, keep learning. Go back to those sources we talked about, the Real Milk website, that Wikipedia article, even that raw farm video. See what you think. See what questions you have.
And it's okay to be skeptical. It's okay to ask tough questions. It's your health. You deserve to make good choices, informed choices.
Absolutely. And if you're thinking about trying raw milk, do your research. Find a good source, be careful, and most importantly, listen to your body.
Great advice. And even if you decide raw milk's not for you, hopefully this has been interesting. Maybe it made you think about our food system.
Yeah.
About the choices we all make every day.
That's what it's all about, right? Finding that balance between tradition and science and what you as an individual feel is best.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this raw milk journey. It's been a fascinating one. Until next time, stay curious.